It doesn't matter who you are or what you do, everyone can benefit from being more organized. Being organized is what I call having a superpower. If you're more organized in your work, in terms of your health and fitness, or maybe it's just in your house and managing your family and your kids, if you're more organized, I think you're setting yourself up for more success because you've got everything sorted, you've got everything planned out, but also less stress because you're not flustering at the last minute to go and find things and think about what do I need to do next. And so if you can cultivate a more organized mindset, I think it's this fantastic skill that everyone can benefit from. Now in this video, I'm not focusing so much on the practical what tools to use to be more organized. I've got loads of videos on my YouTube channel that address that. Instead, I want to talk about the mindset. What are the principles that you can apply when thinking about how to be more organized? If you have any questions at the end of this video, please feel free to leave me a comment below. Now, to be more organized, one of the first questions I ask myself, and I find myself asking this multiple times a day, almost subconsciously now, is how can I set my future self up for success? This is something I've talked about before on my podcast, back in episode number 108. And the idea here is to reframe how you're approaching organization. Instead of just thinking, I need to be more organized, which is sort of not a particularly motivating thought, instead think about, okay, how can I set my future self up for success? How can I make it easier to come back to this project or whatever it is that I'm working on? How can I make it easier now to come back to this later? So for example, if you're finishing up working on a project, maybe you just got off a call with a client or you got out of a meeting. It's important to take time right there in the moment while it's all still fresh in your mind to think about documenting the notes or action items of what you need to do next. So that when you come back to this project or whatever it is that you're working on, maybe a week or two from now, you can look back at those notes which you've documented and you can very quickly and easily pick up where you left off. If you don't do that, if you don't take that time in the moment right there and then, what will happen is you'll get 2 weeks down the line, you'll come back to the project, and now you're going to waste time having to go back through emails to look at, where did we get to, what was the decision we made, or what did we need to do next? You might even need to go back and look at meeting recordings to kind of refresh your memory, and you end up backtracking and having to redo a lot of the work that you've already done just to catch up to where you're at. And so you're actually going to consume a lot more time and make it longer to do the actual work than if you had actually just taken a second or a couple of minutes when you'd finished that meeting or when you had last worked on the project to document where you were at. Another good example of this could be your nutrition. Maybe you're trying to lose or even gain weight and you're going to follow a strict diet. Well, a great way to be more organized and to set your future self up for success is to prepare all your meals on a Sunday. Cook everything up, put it in containers, stick it all in the fridge so that you've done all the work, you've done it in one big batch, you're not having to cook loads of individual meals, so that's more efficient. But also you're setting yourself up for success because now you've already done the work. All you need to do is grab a meal, heat it up, and it's going to be more likely that you'll stick to that nutrition meal plan that you've set up. So try this out. Just ask yourself on a regular basis, how can I set my future self up for success? What can I do now to make my life easier tomorrow or next week within the context of what I'm doing? And the great thing is you naturally start to become more organized without even making organization the goal. Answering that question forces you to be more organized. My next piece of advice is to keep your tools and your systems up to date. And this is really more applicable to kind of being organized in sort of a professional work sense. Now, when we're doing our work, we often have a range of tools that we use to organize ourselves, whether it's a sales CRM tool that I use like Pipedrive or project management software. Again, I use Asana. We all have notes. We've all got contact information, documents and spreadsheets, and lots of different things that we need to keep up to date. The important thing I want to remind you here is that these tools, this software that we use, is there to make our life easier. But the tool is only ever as good as how up to date it is. A lot of the clients that approach me for help with tools like Asana and Pipedrive aren't getting full value from these systems quite simply because the adoption of the tools is not quite there. Either it's themselves or the members of their team are not updating their project management tool, or they're not updating their CRM. And so then they tell me, oh, we're not following up with leads, or this project, often we get stuck and the project gets sort of on hold because we're not sure what to do next. A key part of the solution is to keep the tools up to date. And it's ironic because a lot of the salespeople we talk to are often quite reluctant to update their CRM. They often feel like, well, if I'm having to spend time managing the tool and inputting information into the tool, it's less time that I have to spend actually selling and doing my job. And I get that. Obviously, we don't want the tool to be a burden, but at the same time, the tool is there to make your life easier. And if you're not updating it, if you're not putting in the notes from that meeting or identifying the next actions for that sale or for that project, whatever it is that you're doing, as I mentioned in the previous tip, you're going to have to backtrack later, and that's going to take more time than if you just updated the tool right there and then. And so my key takeaway here is to keep your systems up to date so that the software can do its job and make your life easier later. My next mindset tip is to work in real time and stop postponing things until later. Now, I spoke about this recently on my blog and in a previous video, which is that I'll often get an email that might require some kind of small action, maybe 5 to 10 minutes to think about how I'm going to respond, or maybe there's something I need to do as a part of that email. And a lot of people, I feel, postpone things like that and kick the can down the road and think, I'll come back to this later. And so you end up building up this body of work of stuff that's just sort of in progress, like I'll get to that later when I have a bit more time. Whereas I prefer to often just deal with those things as they come in. If it's going to take, less than 10 minutes to do, I'll just do it right there and then. Of course, if it's something that's going to take a lot longer, maybe I need to schedule some time for that, and that's a slightly different story. But my goal here is to try and close as many open loops as I can. I really want to try and minimize the amount of tasks, emails, requests that are coming in that are in progress. I want to close as many of those loops as I can as quickly as possible. And I find when you have less in progress stuff to manage at any one time, you naturally become more organized, less stressed, because there's less of that work in progress sitting in the background. Next, my advice is to document your processes. And I have a video that I'll link up here on how I do this using templates in Asana. And the reason documenting your processes makes you more organized is that if you have tasks or work that you or members of your team do on a regular basis, by having everything clearly documented, first of all, you can be more efficient because you've got the process, you've got the checklist written down, and you can follow the same steps every time. Again, we're not having to backtrack and think about, how did I do this last time? Because you've prepared in advance to write everything out. It's also going to make you more consistent, less likely to miss an important step. And so the end result or the outcome of that work is that you have done the task properly and you're not wasting time having to fix what you've done if you didn't follow the process correctly. So documenting how we do things and how to complete a specific process is a great way to be more organized. Even if you work by yourself, like I did for many years before I started to grow my team, it's really handy having these processes written down so you can remind yourself of the correct process easily every single time. But as you grow your team, and if you're onboarding someone new who's never followed that process before, it's going to make the process of onboarding them and teaching them the process that much quicker and easier. By being organized now to write everything out, it means that you can give them the process, and ideally, if they can follow the process without any external input needed, they can learn the new process really quickly without having to bother you for extra input. And my final piece of advice today is to hold yourself to a higher standard. Really what I mean is be disciplined with yourself. As we've talked about, set your future self up for success. Keep your systems up to date. Document those processes and hold yourself to a high standard to do all of those things. A lot of the time, I think people who aren't organized are looking for what tool or app or service can they use that's just going to magically solve their problems for them. But as we talked about, software in particular is only as good as how well you use it. And that does require being disciplined and holding yourself to a standard. It's up to you to make a conscious effort to be more organized. The great thing about being more organized, though, is it creates this sort of positive feedback, almost flywheel effect, where if you are more organized and you're on top of everything that you're doing, then you naturally start to be more organized to keep that going. You know, it's this great feeling of like, I'm on top of everything, I've got a lot going on, but I know exactly where I'm at. That's a really cool feeling to experience. And so that it creates this positive reinforcement effect. So I hope this video has been useful. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, leave me a comment below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.